Well, we always enjoy having John Mittendorf in the house. He works with Answers in Genesis. He writes books. He jumps tall buildings. He's faster than a locomotive. Anyway, a little bit later on today, we're going to be giving away a copy of this. This is a book that John has put together called Evolution or Creation. This is the essence of all of his seminars and discussions, and this is a fascinating book. Actually, it's a workbook. And I think you're going to find it to be a tremendous resource. So be listening a little bit later on during the program. We'll be giving one of these away. Hi, John. How you doing, bud?
Good, Perry.
And you want to talk about pyramids and the Great Pyramid. You know, I guess they're back in there poking around, huh?
Yes, they are. And are you ready to take a trip inside?
I'd love to, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
You know, this subject we're going to just briefly discuss this morning, and this may carry over till next month. Is one of the most popular programs I do,
yeah.
Ancient Technology, because people, they've got the input from secular archaeologists that say, well, you know, ancient man, and we've gone through the Stone Age and the Bronze Age and the Iron Age, you know, and we came from apes and all this stuff, and so slowly over the years we've accelerated, and then suddenly here we are today, and we have aircraft, and we have phones, and we have iPads, and all this stuff, you know. And then, but when you look at the pyramids, you look at Stonehenge, and something doesn't ring true in that. And when you and I covered this subject 5 years ago, that since then, the History Channel has jumped on this with both feet. And so has Nat Geo, National Geographic. And they realize that people are extremely interested in it, and they're also extremely interested in ratings.
Wow.
And so they've done a lot of programs on this. And you'll recall a couple years ago we interviewed Christopher Dunn,
Right.
who is a British machinist, advanced machining background. And he's been in the pyramid. If you've watched the History Channel, he's the guy that you see inside with all the high-tech equipment. He's sitting inside the sarcophagus, what's called the sarcophagus, and doing measurements and all of this. And so what we're going to talk about this morning is you can believe it or not believe it.
Believe it or not.
But the fact is, it's there.
Okay.
And that you cannot dismiss. But out of all of that, I don't want to dismiss the biblical foundation that all this is built on. The biblical foundation is that if God created Adam and Eve in His image, which He did, that they were intelligent if they were created in God's image.
Yeah.
And so if you go about 1,600 years to the flood, everybody spoke the same language, and the average age for a person was 912 years, you would have had a technology that most likely would have far surpassed what we have today. I mean, that's just natural. What would have happened if Einstein would have lived 900 years?
Whoa.
You know, who knows?
Yeah.
So then you had the flood, and of course everything was destroyed, and basically it built back up again. But what I'm saying is that one of the reasons I really like this subject is that it points directly at the Bible. And when I say that, it points directly at the Bible because we should see evidence of technology in the past. If Adam and Eve were created smart in God's image, we should see evidence of that. And we do. And we do.
Okay.
However, if I were to step into the secular archaeological position of man basically came from apes, then if I go back 4, 5, 6, 7,000 years, I shouldn't see technology. But I do.
You do.
And that's why archaeology has coined the phrase OPARTs, out-of-place artifacts. In other words, they shouldn't be there.
But they are.
But they are.
Okay.
So what does archaeology do about that?
Sweep it under the
Sweep
rug?
it under the rug. But they can't. They can't. And so one of the things I'm looking for this morning is we have graphics to put up. And so if I can have the guys in the tech room bring up figure 2, which should show just a quick picture of the pyramids right there. Now you mentioned the Great Pyramid, and help me because we have people listening to the program this morning that don't have television.
Right.
So we have to watch that.
Right.
And so I want to be very descriptive in what we're talking about. That what the picture we're looking at is all of the pyramids, and of course the Great Pyramid is the big one. That's Khufu. That's about 500 feet high.
Wow.
That is the only remaining artifact out of the original 7 wonders of the world, because it's 500 feet of basically granite and stone. So you know it's remaining. And so let me have the guys bring up figure 3, which is another picture. When we talk about the pyramids, people tend to think that pyramids are basically in Egypt, and that's not true. There's pyramids all over the world. And the picture that we have up now is the Great White Pyramid in China. which is well over 1,000 feet high. And the graphic that's showing there, the pyramid to the left is the Great Pyramid of Khufu, which is just 500 feet. And then there's the Empire State Building to kind of give you a general idea of what we're talking about. And of course, the Great Pyramid in China, which is basically the same as the one in Egypt, is well over 1,000 feet high. So when you say pyramids, we're not just talking about Egypt, North Africa. We're talking about a worldwide design that was used thousands of years ago for a reason. For a reason. And that reason is, at least from the Egyptian perspective, is that pyramids, and particularly Khufu, were built as a burial chamber for the pharaohs. That is incorrect. That the Egyptologist, Dr. Mark Lanier, has stated that they have never found a pharaoh in any pyramid. There's 80 pyramids in Egypt. They've never found a pharaoh in any pyramid. They find them in the Valley of the Kings. So that being the case, then what did they build a pyramid for? See? And that brings up, if I can have the guys bring up figure 4. And this will be very, very interesting. The Great Pyramid of Khufu is the only pyramid that they have been inside. And that's courtesy of, they feel, was a tomb robber back in 800 AD. Bored in the side of the pyramid, and they accidentally bored into one of the chambers, which opened up the entire inside the pyramid. In fact, Steve Johnson has been inside the pyramid. And the graphic that we have on the screen now, let me describe this to the listeners that don't have the advantage of a graphic, is you have a pyramid, but what you have is various channels and passages inside the pyramid, but there is one large passageway that goes up at a 45-degree angle. That's the one you can see on the right there, and that's called the grand staircase. And then it comes up, and then it levels off horizontally and goes into what's called the king's chamber. And people will say, well, that's where they buried the king. Well, not really. Not really. But the interesting part to this is you will notice when you look at the graphic, Perry, that you have this column in the middle of the pyramid, which is called the king's chamber, and then you have a device that's on top of that. But if you go underneath the king's chamber, you'll see another little chamber down below, and that's called the queen's chamber. And people would say, well, that's where they buried the king and that's where they buried the queen. But they didn't. They find them in the Valley of the Kings. What's fascinating...
In fact, there's no bones in there, right?
There's nothing at all. No. It's as clean as a whistle, so to speak. But when they buried the pharaohs, they would bury them with all of their artifacts so they could take it with them to the afterlife. So they would find beds and, well, you've seen all the stuff that came out of King Tut's tomb. But inside this pyramid is totally clean. The fascinating part about this, Perry, is I mentioned you can believe it or you cannot believe it. One of the ways that you judge the technology of a civilization is to compare it to your civilization. So I would say that the American civilization is probably the most advanced civilization on the planet today, correct?
I would say so.
Would you agree with that? I think so. I think so. However, with all of the technological advancements that we've made, we have no idea how the Egyptians did what they did or what they did. And when I say that, a classic example is, and I was talking to Steve this morning, there's 2.3 million blocks in the pyramid of granite. They estimate that using today's technology, it would have taken the Egyptians, it would have taken us today 27 years to cut and quarry the stone and move them to the site to build a pyramid like that today. It took the Egyptians somewhere between 10 to 20 years to do it. The blocks are cut to 10,000ths of an inch. It's 2.3 million blocks. Today, our quarries maintain a tolerance of 1/4 of an inch. They were doing 10,000ths of an inch. Are you with me so far?
Yeah, the whole thing is so fascinating. I mean,
it's fascinating, but the bottom line is people will ask me, how did they do it? And I say, I can tell you how they did it. They did it because it was easy for them to do. Now, don't ask me specifically how they did it, but they did it because 2.3 million blocks to 10,000ths of an inch, that's not something that an Egyptian with a copper chisel and a hammer is out there banging on a granite block to do that.
They did it because they could.
They did it because they could. Here's another one. The piece of granite that's called a sarcophagus, what people would assume that they would bury the pharaoh in, sits in the middle of the king's chamber. It weighs 70 tons. It's made out of pink granite. If a quarryman was to make it today, they would make 5 slabs. You would take the bottom slab, which would be the bottom, and you would take the other 4 and make the perimeter and bolt it all together. That would be a box. How did the Egyptians do it? They took a solid piece of granite, 70 tons, and hewed out the inside perfectly straight and perfectly flat. When Christopher Dunn was over in Egypt, he took a machinist square and sat in the sarcophagus and put the square up against the side, took a flashlight, and no light came out the other side. That means the sides are perfectly flat to a machinist's tolerances.
Man.
How'd they do that?
How'd they do that?
How they do that. And then, when the side of the sarcophagus comes down, when it meets the floor, it has a perfect 7/16" radius all the way around. That takes machining tools to do that. That's not a chisel.
How in the world did they do it? In spite of the movies that you saw in Ben-Hur, they did not have, they didn't have little, you know, pieces of trees or old tree down there rolling these blocks.
To drag the blocks, no, right.
Something that this has captivated the thinking and really spoils a lot of scientists' thinking as well. Right. What happened and what went on in there? So you have some drawings of inside these things.
Yes, if I can have the tech guys bring up figure 5. This is a close-up of what's inside the pyramid. And I might want to add, Perry, that what we're going to talk about is out there. However, if it looks like a duck, if it quacks like a duck, if it walks like a duck, it probably is. Yeah. And there has been numerous articles and books written on this subject from a technical advantage that they say, if you don't believe what I'm telling you, then can you tell me why they did what they did? Yeah. And there is not an answer from
or how they did it.
Or how there's not an answer from their side. Okay. What we're looking at, Perry, on the screen, and for those that are listening, the device that's inside the pyramid, which if you're ever in Egypt, you can walk inside the pyramid and look at this.
Okay, this is the king's chamber.
This is what's called the king's chamber.
Okay.
And the grand gallery, which comes up from the right, comes up at a 45-degree angle, then levels off, and it goes through 3 or 4 large stones that are adjustable from outside the pyramid. You can raise or lower them. You then walk into what's called the king's chamber. Now, the pyramid is made out of limestone. Now, there's capstones on the outside, which are granite, and that was to give it resistance against the weather. And stuff, but inside's the cheapy stuff.
Okay.
Except for the king's chamber. If we can go back to the graphic, the entire king's chamber is made out of pink granite, which was shipped from Aswan, 500 miles away. First question comes up, why did they make all of that out of pink granite? Yeah. And I'll get to that in just a minute.
All right.
So above the king's chamber, you have this column that runs up inside the pyramid, and what you have are beams that weigh 70 tons each, and there's 43 of them stacked on top of each other with a gap in between. Each beam is perfectly tuned to the F-sharp chord, 438 cycles. They know that because NASA has taken a sound generator inside the king's chamber, and when they go up to the frequency spectrum, the beams will start to vibrate when they hit F-sharp.
Wow.
Now, why is that noteworthy? The frequency of the Earth is F-sharp chord, 438 cycles. Everything has a frequency, and you're probably familiar with, if you were in the military, when I was in the Air Force, we were taught that we marched across a bridge, everybody was to march out of step.
Out of step.
Because if anything reaches its natural frequency, its harmonic frequency, whatever that is, it will start to vibrate. And they don't want a bridge to vibrate. The bridge in Tacoma is a classic example. What happened when the winds blew and that bridge started to vibrate?
Yeah.
It came down. It came down. So if we go back to the graphic, so you have these beams that are, and they're also supported so they can vibrate. And then at the top of that, you have a roof on top of that, also of pink granite at a 45-degree angle. The entire, when I had that drawn, it was not drawn quite accurately enough. The king's chamber, the walls and the floor are all suspended inside the pyramid. And if you can imagine the floor being sitting on what would look like an egg crate, in other words, undulating, and it sits on it. So the entire assembly inside the pyramid in reality is separate from the pyramid, from the limestone blocks.
So it's just kind of floating in there.
It's floating in there, and it's all made out of pink granite. Now, why is pink granite noteworthy?
Well, is it conducive to the frequency?
Because it's high in crystalline quartz. Pink granite has over 55% crystalline quartz. And crystalline quartz, it's called a piezoelectric effect. If I can have the guys bring up figure 6. And crystalline quartz is a very interesting a material that crystalline quartz, if you can mechanically vibrate it or squeeze it, it will turn your vibrations into electrical energy. Are you starting to see where we're going with this?
Yeah.
Okay.
The light's coming on.
The light's coming on.
Literally.
People that are watching and listening to this are going, you got to be kidding me, because the Penguin World Atlas of Ancient Civilizations says, and I quote, we're talking 2500 BC here.
Yeah.
Okay. And what they say, and I'm quoting, is that the ancient Egyptian culture was nothing more than a farming community that did not have the advantage of pulleys or a wheel.
Yeah.
That's a quote.
Really?
Yes.
And look at that.
And now we're looking at this.
Yeah.
So if we can go back to the graphic on figure 5, please.
All right.
On figure 5.
Yeah.
This is what they think they were doing. That if this device inside the pyramid is tuned to the F-sharp chord, that, and I'm simplifying, that they feel that they had what they would call magnifiers or Helmholtz generators in the Grand Gallery, and that's that 45-degree channel you see coming up from the right. What that would do, as the pyramid was tuned to the Earth's frequency, it would start to vibrate. The vibrations coming up the Grand Gallery would be magnified, and as it went through those 4 stones that could be raised or lowered, they could tune the harmonic frequencies out and just have a pure F-sharp chord going into the king's chamber.
And that created the energy.
Well, okay, let me take it one step further.
Now, one other thing, bring that figure back up. You got two left and right beams of light coming in?
No, I'll get to that in just a second.
All right.
So, as the waves would have come into the king's chamber, they would have come into the sarcophagus, which is also pink granite, correct?
Yeah.
They would be directed vertically up through the beams, which would start to vibrate. And the waves would then go up through the channel to the roof, which is at a 45-degree angle, and then be directed back down through into the king's chamber. And then those 2 little teeny passageways that you see going out of the king's chamber was how they got the electromechanical energy out of the king's chamber.
Wow.
I'm leaving out some details, but that's basically what they were doing.
All right, let's go back to the very first figure, if the guys in the room can bring it up, where you have multiple pyramids.
Okay,
And
that was figure 2.
Okay, and I think what's interesting about that, because I asked you the question during the break, is there any correlation as to where they sit, and do they have some kind of function among themselves?
What we've been talking about so far is highly debatable.
Okay.
Although, and people are listening this morning, if they're very, very interested in this subject, Christopher Dunn has written a very, very good book called the Giza Power Plant.
Okay.
It's a fabulous book, and you're showing that on the TV screen now. You can get that in Barnes & Noble. If you read that book, you'll be hard-pressed not to believe what this pyramid was used for, because he presents all the scientific study that's been done on it, and how all the ducks, I'm going to say how all the ducks line up in a row.
All right.
It's fascinating. But he also, in the book, he forwards the idea that it's possible that the small pyramids around the large pyramid were used as a smaller device to excite the vibrations inside the larger pyramid to get it going, so to speak, like a donkey engine and a caterpillar tractor.
Oh, okay.
You have the big engine, then they start the small engine, and then they engage it, and then they get the big engine going. And then the stones that were movable up and down vertically inside the pyramid, that were adjustable from outside, could be used to fine-tune the frequencies coming into the pyramid exactly. In other words, filter out the subharmonics, because you only want the F-sharp chord.
Now, it's fascinating, to say the least. All this
Okay.
is just mind-blowing, but it makes sense.
Okay.
But you got to go back prior to, so this, let me back up. This then shows that they were producing power.
Yes.
That they were producing power. Now, how they harnessed that and used it is another.
We don't know, because it's some type of a microwave energy.
Right.
And what they were doing with it, we don't know. But if you look at it from their perspective, when I say you compare their culture with our culture today, here we have huge machines, we have huge coal-burning plants, we have all this stuff. If they had that pyramid, this is if If they had that pyramid sitting there that was capable of generating some type of a microwave energy, it was perfectly clean. It was perfectly green, if you want to use that term, right? And it was free. Therefore, you would have had no large plants, machinery, and all the associated stuff that we have today left over. The only thing you'd have had left over was a pyramid of blocks 500 feet high, and that's still what's sitting there today.
Okay, now part of this question is, I mean, that's the function of the pyramid. We really haven't, and don't have time now to answer, how in the world did they cut those stones and move them, and how did they get that pink stone 500 miles away in one piece?
It weighed 70 tons, they did 43 of them.
And how did they cut those and move them?
Why don't we tackle that next month?
Okay, because they're perfectly fit together. What's this doing to the academic and the science community?
When we did this 5 years ago, it was totally not even discussed. But now it's being discussed because History Channel and Nat Geo realizes there's money to it, so they're willing to step up the plate. You can go to History Channel and get their DVD series, Ancient Aliens, is how they describe this.
Right.
This technology came from aliens that came here, dropped it here, and then they left again. That's the only way. If you're going to discount...
Oh, let's kick God out from the very beginning.
If you're going to discount the Bible, Perry, that's the only way you can do it. And that's exactly what they're doing. Next month, how about if I answer the question that you're talking about? I'm also going to talk about Gattenbrink's door, which is a discovery they made probably within the last 7 or 8 months, which are doors inside the pyramid in some of these little channels that have copper electrodes in them. Now, why would you have 2 copper electrodes inside of a little door in a channel that goes outside the pyramid?
All right, there's a picture there.
And that's the picture right there.
Is that like a great big plug in the wall? So you just
well,
plug it in
it's only about, that channel is only about 8 inches square, but that's called Gattenbrink's door.
All right, we're going to give John's personal book away. He's authored this book.
Yep.
It's a workbook called Evolution or Creation.
And it's color, by the way.
It's all got a lot of stuff in here that you're going to enjoy it. Anyway, 776-5368, caller number 10 will receive a copy of this book. 776-5368. John, you're fascinating. Can't wait to get you back. And this book here is the Giza power plant. There's a picture of it there. You can check that out at Barnes & Noble, put out by Bear & Company Publishing. Thank you, John.
You bet. One quick...
no, we got it. We're done.
Okay,
You're done.
We're out. We're out of here.
See ya.
Okay, that's it.
You got to go back to the Stone Age, John.
Yeah. I wasn't watching the clock.